On Mother's Day, my daughter slid a diamond ring worth $20,000 onto her mother-in-law's finger, promising her a cruise across the Caribbean. For me, a $5 plastic flower and a sloppy note. The laughter around the table stung more than the cheap gift. I sat there invisible while the woman who had given Monica nothing but her last name was worshipped like a queen. Rage burned inside me, but I didn't shout. I remembered every night I sold pieces of my life to build hers. She thought I was weak. She thought I would stay silent. She was wrong. I was 29 when my husband died in a logging accident, leaving me with nothing but a 6-year-old girl and a mountain of bills. His family wanted me to remarry quickly to find stability, but I knew what that really meant, handing my daughter over to a stepfather who might never see her as his own. So I stayed alone, even when loneliness carved itself into my bones. Instead, I poured everything I had into Monica. We lived in the old Carter house back then, the one my parents had left me, its wooden beams sagging, the kitchen window cracked from a storm years earlier. It wasn't much, but it was ours. That house became my workshop. I started with herbs from the backyard, lavender, chamomile, rosemary, boiled in pots I had inherited, blended into small jars of cream. Neighbors came first, then their friends, then the local farmers market. I called it Carter Botanicals, but everyone just called it Evelyn's little miracle jars. It was exhausting work. I'd stay up past midnight, bottling lotion with swollen fingers, my wrists aching from the early signs of arthritis. But every dollar I made went to Monica's future. When she wanted piano lessons, I worked weekends to pay for them. When she begged for a class trip to Washington, D.C., I sold my wedding ring to cover the cost. She never knew. I didn't tell her that I skipped meals some nights, surviving on tea and bread crusts, so she could have new shoes for the start of school. The business grew slowly, too slowly. Banks turned me away 3 times before I finally signed papers for a loan that I knew could ruin me if sales dipped. But I gambled on myself. I gambled on Monica. When the choice came to keep the Carter house or invest everything in expanding production, I chose her. I sold the house my parents had left me, the last piece of family history I had. We moved into a cramped apartment above a laundromat, the air thick with detergent and steam. But Monica had her own desk to study at, and that mattered more. She was a bright child, sharper than I ever was. She dreamed bigger than I did, and I wanted nothing to hold her back. When she got accepted to NYU, I nearly collapsed with pride. The tuition was a mountain, but I carried it. Every bottle I poured, every sore joint I massaged with my own product just to keep going, was a payment toward her future. I mortgaged my health, my savings, my very body, and I told myself it was worth it because she would rise higher than I ever could. People asked why I never remarried. I gave polite answers. I was busy. I had my daughter. The truth? No man who came after could ever compete with the promise I had made to that little girl at her father's funeral. I will give you everything I have. I will make sure you never feel small, never feel abandoned. That promise became my religion. Carter Botanicals thrived over the years. By the time Monica graduated, the brand was carried in specialty shops across 3 states. People wrote me letters about how my lavender cream eased their anxiety, how my rosemary balm soothed their aching knees. But I never stopped seeing it for what it was, a ladder for Monica to climb. She walked that ladder into an internship in Manhattan, into a circle of friends who wore silk like skin, into a marriage with Daniel Walsh, a man whose last name opened doors mine never could. I thought I had done it. I thought I had delivered her safely into the life I had always dreamed she would have. When I sat in the pew at her wedding, the only dress I owned that still fit me, pulled tight at the seams, I cried, not because I was sad, but because I was proud. She was radiant, the kind of radiant money couldn't buy, but money could maintain. And I told myself that all my sacrifices had finally come full circle. The years after her wedding blurred. Monica visited less. She called when she needed business advice, when she wanted an introduction to a supplier, when she thought Carter Botanicals could modernize to match her friends' brands. I gave in every time. She was my daughter. I never once said no. When she suggested I let her and Daniel handle more of the finances, "You deserve to rest, Mom," I believed her. My hands were stiff, my back sore. Maybe it was time to step back. I signed papers without reading the fine print, trusting the girl I had raised, but I still believed, foolishly, that Mother's Day would be different. Surely, out of all the days in the year, this one would remind her of what I had carried for her. The sleepless nights, the hunger I hid, the decades of toil that bent my fingers and stole my youth. Surely she would look at me, not as a burden, not as a stepping stone, but as her mother, the woman who had given everything so she could stand tall. I was wrong. That evening, as I straightened the modest cardigan I had worn 100 times before, I told myself the ache in my chest was just anticipation. I told myself she would smile at me, that she would remember. I did not know that the only gift waiting for me was humiliation. I did not know that the girl I had raised, the girl I had sacrificed everything for, was about to erase me with the ease of a single careless gesture. And I did not know that night would mark the beginning of my undoing. The restaurant glowed like a cathedral that night, chandeliers dripping with crystal light, waiters gliding in black and white, carrying trays of champagne flutes that shimmered with golden bubbles. Monica had rented the entire second floor, a banquet room with glass walls overlooking the city skyline. I had never stepped into a place so grand. The carpet alone seemed softer than the bed I slept in. I stood near the back, clutching my worn handbag like a lifeline, while Monica floated from table to table in a silk dress that shimmered with every step. She was radiant, magnetic, everything I had dreamed she would become. Guests kissed her cheek, praised her elegance, called her the future of Carter Botanicals, as if I were already gone. I forced a smile, reminding myself that tonight was about family, about gratitude. Surely she would not forget me. Dinner was a parade of excess. Lobster tails glistening with butter, wine older than Monica herself, a dessert cart that looked like a jewelry display. I watched her in the center of it all, raising her glass to toast her husband's mother, a woman with diamond earrings so large they caught every flicker of light in the room. Then Monica pulled out a small velvet box, opening it with theatrical grace as cameras and phones turned toward her. Inside was a diamond ring so large it looked like it belonged in a museum, not on a hand. Monica slid it onto her mother-in-law's finger as the woman gasped, tears spilling down her cheeks. "A ring for the woman who gave me a second family," Monica declared, her voice carrying like a stage actress. "More precious to me than blood itself." The room erupted in applause. Glasses clinked, phones flashed, guests murmured, "What a perfect daughter-in-law, what a blessing, what devotion." Someone called the older woman a saint of motherhood, and I felt the words pierce me like shards of glass. And then, as if to twist the knife deeper, Monica presented an envelope with tickets to a luxury Caribbean cruise. "You deserve the world," she said, kissing her mother-in-law's cheek. The woman wept again, while Monica live-streamed the entire moment with a caption that burned into my eyes when I glimpsed it on the screen. "The woman who gave me family greater than blood." For me? When the lights dimmed for dessert, Monica walked over, barely glancing at me as she handed me a plastic flower with a barcode sticker still half attached. Alongside it, a card no bigger than a grocery receipt. "Thanks, Mom." That was all. I stared at it, the cheap stem bending in my palm, and tried to swallow the heat rising in my throat. Around me, people clapped and cheered for the other woman, called her an inspiration. My presence was not acknowledged. I could have been a stranger in the room, invisible. I thought of every jar I had filled, every night I had worked through pain, every dollar I had sacrificed to make Monica's dreams possible. And in that glittering hall with laughter ringing and cameras flashing, I realized she had erased me with a single gesture. I smiled faintly to mask the storm inside, but my chest ached like something was tearing loose. I excused myself before dessert was served, slipping out while no one noticed, carrying the plastic flower like evidence of my own erasure. The ride home was silent, the city lights blurring past the taxi window. I kept turning the flower in my hands, the fake petals stiff and cold, as if mocking me. By the time we reached Monica's house, I told myself I would rest, that the humiliation would fade. But fate had other plans. As I climbed the staircase to the guest room where I often stayed, voices drifted from the study downstairs. I paused, my hand on the railing, and listened. "She signed most of the papers already." Monica's voice was cool, calculated. "Once we finalize the transfer, we'll have control of everything. She's too tired, too weak to manage it anymore." Daniel chuckled. "It's about time. She should enjoy her retirement. We'll take Carter Botanicals further than she ever could. She won't fight us. She doesn't have it in her." My knees nearly buckled. The railing bit into my palm as I clung to it. Retirement. Weak. Out of the way. They weren't just forgetting me. They were planning to erase me completely. The cheap flower slipped from my hand, falling silently onto the step. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might wake the house. Were they blind to what I had built? Or worse, did they see it clearly and simply believe I was no longer worth a place in it? I stood frozen, the voices below growing softer as the door to the study clicked shut. Alone in the dark hallway, I pressed my forehead to the wall, my breath ragged. Had my life's work been nothing but a stepping stone for them to trample? I closed my eyes and whispered to myself, though no one could hear, "They have not forgotten me. They are trying to erase me." And in that moment, I understood that the humiliation of a plastic flower was only the beginning. The days after that dinner unfolded like a slow unraveling of thread. I woke each morning in Monica's house, the sunlight pouring through curtains I hadn't chosen, the silence heavy with absence. Once she used to greet me with hurried kisses on the cheek, whispering, "Don't leave without breakfast, Mom." Now she barely looked up from her phone. When I tried to join her conversations with Daniel, she would smile politely. The way you smile at a stranger you're trying not to offend, then turn away. At the office, the change was sharper. Carter Botanicals had been mine once, every inch of it born from my cracked hands and sleepless nights. Now, as I walked through the hallways, I could feel the shift in the air. Younger employees, freshly hired, whispered when I passed. "That's the old owner," one murmured. Another replied, "I thought Monica founded this." Their ignorance wasn't entirely their fault. Monica's face was on every new press release, every article, every poster. My name had been stripped away like a stain that needed cleaning. I paused at the reception desk one morning, watching a glossy poster being pinned to the wall. It was a new campaign. Monica's smile, Monica's signature at the bottom, Monica holding a bottle of cream I had invented in my kitchen 30 years ago. My reflection in the glass was faint, nearly invisible, and for the first time I realized how easy it was to erase a person, not with cruelty, but with silence. Even Monica herself had begun using words that stung sharper than knives. One evening over dinner, as Daniel boasted about expanding into international markets, she gestured vaguely toward me and said, "Mom's more comfortable resting now. She doesn't keep up with all the new strategies. She's, the extra." The extra. The word rang in my ears long after the plates were cleared, long after the house fell into darkness. I was no longer her foundation. I was ballast, unnecessary weight to be cut loose. I found myself avoiding the office after that. I couldn't bear to walk past my legacy and see it dressed in someone else's clothes. Instead, I wandered the streets, letting the city swallow me. One afternoon, I stood across from the flagship store, the one I had dreamed of opening for decades. The windows were adorned with Monica's face, her name scripted in elegant letters across a line of new products. People streamed in and out carrying bags, laughing, never knowing the woman standing across the street had once bled her fingers raw to make those creams. Not a single trace of me remained. That night, in the small guest room that smelled faintly of detergent and Daniel's cologne, I pulled out an old box from beneath the bed. Inside were the files of my earliest recipes, pages stained with oil, edges curled with age. I held them to my chest and wept, not because of the money, not even because of the company. I wept because my life's work had been swallowed whole, and I was being told, through silence, through omission, that none of it mattered. I don't know how long I sat there, my body trembling, tears soaking the papers. I might have stayed in that hollow despair forever, had it not been for the sound of the mail slot clattering downstairs. Mechanically, I wiped my face, descended the stairs, and picked up the envelope that had slid across the floor. It was handwritten. The return address unfamiliar. Inside was a letter. Dear Mrs. Carter, I don't know if you'll remember me. My name is Hannah, and years ago when I was at my lowest, your lavender cream saved me. Not just my skin, my spirit. I was drowning in depression, unable to leave the house. Your product gave me a small ritual to cling to, something beautiful in a sea of gray. It reminded me I was still worth caring for. I want you to know that you didn't just make lotions. You healed people. You healed me. Thank you, from the bottom of my heart. I read it once. Then again, my tears returning, but this time they carried a different weight. Someone out there remembered me. Someone out there knew the truth, even if my own daughter had forgotten. Clutching the letter, I sat back on the edge of the bed, my chest heaving. The ache of betrayal was still there, but beneath it flickered something else. A question. If the world beyond these walls still remembered me, if strangers valued what I had given, then why was I allowing myself to be erased inside this house? My fingers tightened on the paper until it wrinkled, my breath unsteady. I stared at the closed door, hearing Monica's laughter drift faintly from downstairs, and whispered to the dark, if they still see me out there, do I have to stay silent in here? The question hung in the air, louder than any answer, and I knew it would not leave me. The letter from Hannah lingered in my mind for days, its words echoing like a bell I could not unhear. Someone still remembered me. Someone still believed I had value. It was enough to nudge me into the attic one morning, where the air smelled of dust and cedar, boxes piled high, relics of a life I had tucked away. My hands shook as I pulled one open, rifling through photographs, receipts, forgotten trinkets. At the very bottom lay an envelope yellowed with age, sealed with the careful handwriting of a man I had loved and lost. My breath caught as I traced the letters of my name, Evelyn. I opened it slowly, the paper fragile beneath my fingers. The words inside were his, written decades ago, but sharp as glass now. If they ever make you feel small, don't beg, don't plead. You have stood taller than anyone I've ever known. The company isn't just a business. It is your blood, your spirit. Never forget that it belongs to you and to no one else. My tears blurred the ink, but I kept reading. Tucked within the folded pages was another document, notarized faintly but clear enough, a draft of his will. It confirmed what I had suspected but never dared to rely on. Carter Botanicals was mine, solely mine. No transfer of ownership could occur without my hand. A strange heat coursed through me, not anger exactly, but something stronger. For months I had allowed myself to be diminished, erased, treated like a shadow in my own house. And yet here was proof, not just from the man who once stood by my side, but from the law itself. I was still the root, the foundation, the beginning and end of what Carter Botanicals meant. That afternoon, I drove to the shore. The sea air whipped against my cheeks, salty and fierce. I had lived within walls too long, Monica's walls, Daniel's walls, the walls of silence I had built around myself. For the first time in years, I inhaled deeply, lungs burning with the cold ocean wind. The waves roared like applause in my ears, as if the world itself were reminding me I was still here. I closed my eyes and whispered to the water, "I don't need her to tell me who I am. I already know." The next steps came almost naturally. I thought of a young man named Lucas, whom I had helped a decade earlier. He was just out of college then, lost in debt, trying to launch a skincare line of his own. I had given him advice, shared suppliers, even loaned him seed money I never expected back. He had built something modest but promising, always writing me on holidays to say thank you. If there was anyone who might understand what Carter Botanicals once stood for, it was him. I searched through my old contacts, fingers trembling until I found his number. Dialing it felt like stepping onto a bridge I wasn't sure would hold. The line clicked, and his voice answered, warm with recognition. "Mrs. Carter? Is it really you?" "Lucas," I said softly, "I need to ask you something. Something important." We spoke for nearly an hour. I told him nothing of Monica's betrayal, only that I was considering stepping back and that I wanted Carter Botanicals in hands that valued integrity. He listened intently, his words steady, respectful. "If you trust me," he said at last, "I would be honored." When the call ended, I sat in the quiet of my room, the glow of the lamp casting long shadows. For the first time in years, my heart felt lighter. I was no longer clinging to scraps of dignity. I was shaping a future with my own hands again. Later that evening, as I held the phone, still warm from the conversation, I didn't hear Monica approach. Her voice startled me, sharp as broken glass. "Who are you talking to, Mom?" I turned, meeting her narrowed eyes. She crossed her arms, suspicion etched across her face. "You've been on the phone a lot lately. What's going on? Don't tell me you're doing something behind my back." I smiled faintly, folding the phone into my palm. "Just an old friend, Monica. Nothing for you to worry about." Her gaze lingered on me, searching, probing. But I offered nothing more. For the first time in our lives, I didn't explain myself to her. I simply let the silence stand. Her lips parted, a protest hovering there, but I turned away before she could speak, slipping the phone into my pocket. My heart hammered in my chest, not from fear but from exhilaration. She had no idea what I was preparing, no idea that the power she thought she owned was never hers to claim. As I climbed the stairs to my room, the old floorboards creaking beneath my feet, I could feel the question radiating from behind her eyes, chasing me up each step. What was I hiding? The papers were signed in a quiet office overlooking the harbor, far from Monica's reach. Lucas sat across from me, his expression respectful, not triumphant. He treated me not as a relic being swept aside, but as a partner passing on a legacy. When the final signature dried on the page, I slid the pen back across the table and exhaled, as though releasing 30 years of weight from my shoulders. Carter Botanicals was no longer mine, yet for the first time in years, I felt free. I didn't tell Monica. I didn't tell Daniel. I folded the documents into a neat leather folder and tucked it away. They still believed I was hesitating, still circling me like hawks over a field mouse. But I had already slipped from their talons. With part of the money, I bought a small building by the sea, a weathered place with peeling paint and wide windows that let in the sound of waves. It smelled of salt and driftwood, nothing like the sterile polish of corporate boardrooms. I scrubbed it clean, repainted the walls, and laid out long wooden tables. This was not going to be another empire. It was going to be a refuge. Word spread quickly. Women my age, tired from years of being overlooked, began to gather. Some were widows like me, some divorced, some carrying the scars of children who had drifted away. I showed them how to grind herbs, how to stir oils, how to pour creams into jars with steady hands. Their laughter filled the space, echoing against the windows, blending with the crash of the surf outside. They thanked me, Not with titles, not with money, but with sincerity. And in their gratitude, I remembered what it felt like to matter. Every jar we made was imperfect, fingerprints smudged on the glass, labels crooked. But they were real, alive. We weren't building brands here. We were building each other. For the first time in years, I went home with aching muscles and a heart that was not heavy, but light. Meanwhile, Monica's unease began to show. She called more frequently, her voice sharpened by urgency. "Mom, the board needs your signature on the new expansion documents. Just a formality, really. Daniel's already arranged everything." I would smile into the phone, murmuring vague replies. Sometimes I said I was busy, sometimes I simply let the call go unanswered. Her persistence grew into desperation. She sent lawyers to the house with papers, insisting it was all routine. I skimmed the documents, pages designed to strip me of authority, and set them aside. I never signed. She pressed harder, her voice trembling with frustration each time we spoke. "Mom, why are you dragging your feet? Don't you trust me?" But the truth was simple. I didn't need to drag my feet. The company was no longer theirs to take. One evening, she arrived unannounced, storming through the doorway with Daniel at her side. Her face was pale, her hands shaking as she slapped a file onto the table. "What is this?" she demanded. Inside was a copy of the sale contract, stamped and sealed, entirely legal, entirely final. Daniel flipped through it, his jaw tightening. "You sold it?" His voice cracked like a whip. I met their eyes without flinching. "Yes." Monica's face crumpled, fury and disbelief warring inside her. "You had no right. This was supposed to be mine. Everything I've worked for." "Everything you've worked for?" I interrupted gently. "Or everything I worked for that you assumed would be handed to you?" Her mouth opened, then closed again, no word strong enough to answer. The silence between us stretched, thick and suffocating. Finally, she grabbed her phone and fled the house, Daniel on her heels. I watched from the window as she dialed furiously, her shoulders rigid with rage. The first call came minutes later. "Mom, undo this. Call them back. You can't do this to me." I didn't answer. The second call buzzed, then the third, then the fourth. Each time I watched the phone screen light up, her name bold against the glass, and let it fade. 28 calls in total, one after another, her voice flooding the voicemail with sobs and anger. "Please, Mom, don't sell the company. That's my future. You can't take this from me." But the truth she refused to see was that it had never been hers. It had always been mine. And now I had chosen where it would go. I sat by the window that night, the ocean dark and endless beyond the glass, the phone buzzing itself into silence. For once I felt no need to explain, no urge to soothe. Her desperation was a mirror of my past sacrifices, but I would not pay that price again. I set the phone aside, untouched, and closed my eyes to the sound of waves. The news spread quickly, faster than I ever imagined. Carter Botanicals had been sold, yes, but every headline carried my name with it. Founded by Evelyn Carter, the visionary who began with jars of cream in her kitchen. Reporters didn't call Monica, they called me. Magazines asked for photographs of the early days, the humble recipes scribbled in notebooks. They wanted to hear about the nights I worked with swollen hands, the mornings I delivered jars from the trunk of my car. Suddenly, I was no longer invisible. I was the root once again. Monica must have seen the same articles. I could almost feel her bitterness in the silence that followed. No more angry calls. No more lawyers at my door. She had lost not just the company, but the story itself. The narrative that mattered didn't belong to her. It belonged to me, and it always had. The day of my workshop's opening arrived bright and windy, the sea salt clinging to the air as if eager to be part of the celebration. I had expected a few locals, maybe a handful of curious women from town. Instead, the little building overflowed. Customers who had once written me letters arrived with flowers. Former employees from the company showed up with tears in their eyes. Even strangers came, women who had never met me but who had used my creams and felt touched by something I had created. Bouquets filled the tables, their fragrance mingling with the herbal oils simmering on the stove. The chatter was warm, sincere, nothing like the hollow applause I had endured at Monica's banquet. A woman I barely knew clasped my hands and whispered, "You gave us back more than skincare. You gave us hope." Among the crowd, I noticed a tall arrangement of lilies, elegant and carefully chosen. The card read simply, "With respect and gratitude, Margaret Walsh, Monica's mother-in-law, the woman my daughter had paraded like a queen months earlier. Even she had recognized me now. The irony was sharp but strangely tender. She, too, had been a mother once, and perhaps she understood the weight of sacrifices that children often forget. As I accepted their words, I did not feel pride in the way Monica might have. It wasn't a performance, wasn't about power. It was quiet, like the waves against the shore, steady, enduring. For the first time, I did not need to prove myself to anyone, not even to Monica. From the back of the room, I sensed a presence. I turned and saw her, Monica, standing half in shadow, her arms crossed, her face pale. She hadn't sent flowers, she hadn't smiled. She only watched, her eyes darting from the bouquets to the crowd to me, as if trying to understand why all the reverence she had tried to buy was being poured freely onto me instead. I didn't approach her. She didn't step forward. We were two islands divided by a sea too wide to cross. Yet in her expression, I saw something I had waited years to see. Not love, not regret, but the recognition that I had never been small, that I had never been erased. When the applause rose again, I stepped forward, bowing my head slightly. "Thank you," I said, my voice carrying over the hum of the crowd. Not for the flowers or the kind words, but for reminding me that what we create matters, that what we give from our hearts lives on, even when people forget. They clapped louder, some with tears shining in their eyes. But my gratitude was not for them alone. It was for myself, for the woman who had endured nights of hunger, who had sold her home, who had been given a plastic flower and told she was extra, and who now stood here, unshaken. I stepped out onto the porch when the air grew too thick with emotion. The sea stretched before me, endless and calm. The breeze tugged at my hair as I closed my eyes, inhaling deeply. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need Monica's apology. I had finally chosen myself, and that was enough. Behind me, the voices carried on, laughter and chatter weaving together into a tapestry of life. I leaned against the railing, the salt air stinging my lips, and smiled softly. The ocean did not applaud, yet it recognized me in its own way, enduring, untamed, free. And as the sound of waves mingled with distant clapping, I bowed my head once more, not because I was waiting for recognition, but because I had finally given it to myself. If one day your child forgets every sacrifice you made, what would you do? Would you endure in silence? Or would you quietly rewrite your fate, as I have?